This is part 3 on chapter 7 on feminism. So we had just finished up talking about the Christianity related to the roles of women in the church. So an interesting part of that is the sort of distinction of this Eve versus Mary dynamic, right? With sort of the Eve being seen as almost more like the kind of bad or more negative, sort of leading man down the wrong path, all those sorts of things. Whereas Mary, on the other hand, more as say positive, or say that's kind of the idealized role for women. So a lot of this stuff has been interesting, particularly in previous years. You might have seen the movie, or perhaps hopefully maybe more read the book, The Da Vinci Code. So in there, Dan Brown talks about the perhaps he makes the argument that maybe Mary was actually Jesus's wife, not just some prostitute and things as she's often portrayed as. So again, it depends on your sort of people's perspective, this sort of Mary Eve versus Mary dynamic, and how that kind of has influenced the role of women in the church. So again, most of this class we're looking at ideology, right? So values and beliefs uh, held as truth by a group of people, right? So nationalism, feminism, all those type of things. So, but an interesting wrinkle here is we have feminist theology, right? So looking at how patriarchy has affected belief and practice. So feminist theologians, for example, they might try to argue more that the way they read the Bible or their perspective on the Bible should be more for equality, and how that should play more of a role in our society, and that it really shouldn't be a superior inferior kind of dynamic, anything like that. So all this stuff's very interesting, and it's been sort of a lot of debate, a lot of discussion, particularly in recent decades. So towards getting towards the end of this chapter, there's a lot of sort of different variations of feminism, and sort of more responses to the way things tend to be in society. So, for example, one of the ones we often look at is called reform, or also it's also known as liberal feminism, where they're not arguing for some kind of huge transformation of society or anything, but more again saying basic patterns okay, but women should not be at a disadvantage because of their gender. So a lot of that kind of equal opportunity things we think about, not just in American society but throughout the world, equal opportunity, and they would related more to say things like daycare facilities, parental leave, that type of stuff. So again, just because somebody might be a woman, that should not affect them negatively in society, be it in the workforce or political arena, wherever it might be. On the other hand, so Marxism we know is usually focused on class, right? The idea of sort of the proletariat, the workers, versus more say the owners or the kind of the richer class. So for Marxist feminism, class is still the main focus. Although again, so they look at say something like what happened, the status of women after revolutions in Russia and China, for example. Some of these countries had sort of major political transformations that think about, well, like, oh, okay, if they're moving more towards democracy or away from communism or something, that you would think that would really change. But Marxists would say, well, but class still exists, so that needs to be a key consideration for feminism as well. Socialist feminism, on the other hand, again stresses democratic decision making, right? So again, how should women sort of engage in our political system? All right. So another variation, which is a little bit more, kind of more extreme, I guess you could say, is this transformative feminism, calling a total rethinking away from that hierarchical, patriarchal understanding, right? Again, sort of that male dominance, who's sort of leading who in our society. And then perhaps one that's even more, you could say, extreme or radical, as its name implies, is the separatist or radical feminism, which argues or focusing more on lesbianism and a specifically women-centered culture, right? So again, like books, would be kind of written more for uniquely just for that perspective, that type of thing. So an idea there, which is kind of interesting, is thinking about gays and lesbians, where this is from your book, where it says both groups are defined by rejection of the other group. So again, it's sort of a an interesting aspect to this situation. So related to more current trends, and this is more specifically just for the United States. So what's been going on with women in our political arena? So you can see as far as votes for women, there's this huge disconnect between the actual number of women in office and women in the electorate. So remember, women are about in most countries are slightly over 50% of the population, but in most areas they're nowhere near 50% of the office holders. So an interesting thing to note here is that 25 countries, might actually be a little bit more at this point, have instituted gender quotas. Well, so that means, say for example, like say some country has a parliament with 400 seats, 400 total seats. A gender quota, for example, would say that they're going to have 50% are reserved for men and 50% are reserved for women. It might not be 50-50. It might could be 60-40. However they whatever that country would would decide on there. Again, that would be specifically reserved. So we see other countries do this, not just based on gender, but perhaps on religion. Say if there's two or more major religious groups in the country, that a certain number of seats might be reserved for people from one religion, and then a certain number for others. Some do it. Say Switzerland does a bit of this, depending on which region and therefore which language. Right. So again, Switzerland, for example, has a German-speaking region, a French-speaking region. So they have some quotas related to that aspect. So in the United States, recent figures show that in 2014, that there were 99 total women in Congress. So again, thinking about the 435 total in the House of Representatives and 100 senators, for a grand total of 535. Of that 535 in 2014, 99 were women. So you can see here, right about 1/5, right? So 20% exactly. So out of 100 senators, 20 were female, and then out of the 435 in the House, we have 79 women. So you can see over on the right-hand side, though, that this number has been increasing. So again, so today, right, 20 senators. But look how low some of these numbers were just back in the 1980s, right? Very few women at all in the Senate or the House. And we see pretty big increase here in the 90s, and then in the early 2000s. So again, a lot of folks are looking at that more of a positive light, saying, well, things are going uphill, things are going on the right track. It might take a little bit of time to kind of get more women sort of interested and sort of prepared for a political contest, that type of thing. We do see more women running for office. All right. So then you can also see this average age of lawmakers, right? How that's kind of been increasing a bit as well. All right, so some other current trends here. Right? So we have this aspect of feminism and legal theory. Right? So there's another vocabulary word here. So non-subordination. Right? So this sort of concept argues for recognition of women's actual lived experience instead of this more sort of objective model from male perspective. Maybe saying more like, things. Hey, how come? What do you mean things aren't interested, right? Or aren't equal? Women have the same right to run for office as a man, for example. But maybe that doesn't actually encompass everything from the woman's perspective. So it comes up again, this term of multiculturalism. So remember we had that in the globalization chapter. So that's the idea that of sort of including different sort of cultural aspects from various groups in society. More maybe related to the salad bowl conception of immigrant integration and assimilation versus the melting pot concept. So, related to feminism, many people say that multiculturalism can create a problem. So, in some areas, if a certain culture, religion, or whatever might include the rejection of equal rights, like say in the United States, for example, if folks from a certain immigrant community said, well, we don't believe in our society, we don't believe women should go or have the right to go to school, say for example. Well, then obviously that would clash with you know other kind of American values that would contrast with United States law, state laws, that type of thing. So sometimes the idea of multiculturalism can be a difficult thing for feminism, or more specifically to there's been court cases in England, for example, like under Sharia law, for example, maybe if it's argued that a man has the right to hit his wife or something like that, how does that sort of relate to British law? So again, not easy answers sometimes related to multiculturalism, feminism, law, all those type of things. So another aspect of current trends related to feminism, and it's sort of been a long-standing criticism of feminism, is that most feminists are white. So a lot of women of color would say, well, maybe they don't necessarily speak for us, right? That say Black, Latina, whoever would say white women and particularly Western cultures like the United States, Western Europe, Australia, and so forth, that they're not necessarily prepared to, or that they don't really have the right to speak for women, for other women. So an interesting aspects related to the gender versus sort of race and identity, how all those things come together, is that in 2008 we had this interesting dynamic of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton both seeking the Democratic nomination for president. So going back to that time, one of the interesting aspects is that Hillary Clinton thought that she was going to get much more the female African American vote than she did, right? So that in that case, there seemed to be an obvious preference more, or the direction was moved more for race, looking at Barack Obama as an African American, than it was based on gender, looking at Hillary Clinton as a woman. So back at that time, Hillary Clinton felt sort of, I guess you could say, hurt, or sort of that a lot of the work that she and Bill Clinton had done with the African American community, maybe she didn't feel like that was necessarily appreciated or recognized as much as she had hoped. So related to Black women and feminism, I have this other book here called "Ain't I a Woman?" Right, this is from this author called Bell Hooks. You can see she does this on purpose, that she does not capitalize her name. So a lot of her writing, sort of has these sort of interesting characteristics like that. All right, so this is from 1981. So it has some sort of interesting aspects in there, sort of looking at feminism in general, and then how can some of that be applied, or what are some of the major differences that maybe Black women would see in there versus white or whoever else. So there's this sort of idea that what white feminists might say, well, these are the core beliefs, core values of feminism, these universal claims, that maybe those don't always necessarily apply to Black women. That they might sort of have things that are important to them, wouldn't necessarily be so for white women in France or Germany or the United States, something like that. All right. So again, we have some other key themes here. So looking at sort of some things like in third world feminism, things like that. Um, but I'll go ahead and end this video here, and we'll continue this slide on the next video.